I can't believe I'll be forced to share a bed with my ex. I wasn't expecting to hear another engine pull up, but hey, leave it to my brother Thomaz to annoy me with style. And, of course, it had to be his boyfriend Elliot driving. I'm used to seeing him every week by now. As soon as I opened the door, the excitement hit me hard. This beach house has been my absolute favorite spot since I was a kid. We used to spend every summer here, but I stopped that when I started prepping for college. I promised I wouldn't return until I aced my exams, and guess what? I did. Top of my class. I went straight to the door, the keys in my hands, and as soon as I got in, memories flashed in front of my eyes. All I could feel was happiness, even though I thought it would be just me and my brother all weekend. Thomaz followed me, leaving some stuff on the kitchen balcony, and then Elliot came in. "We're here," he sang. "We?" I asked, instantly feeling the walls of the wooden house trap me inside an old nightmare. "James came too." I gazed at my brother with hate in my eyes, who only offered me a half laugh. "Oops, didn't I mention it?" Gritting my teeth, I murmured, "No, you didn't." I should have known we would see each other after 6 years at some point, but I could never imagine it being like that. He passed the door with some suitcases in his hand and a bag on his shoulders. "Hey, Markus," he said, his voice still being the same, but more mature. He was also taller, and his skin was still as beautiful as always. I felt my heart clench. "Hey." "Okay," Thomaz shouted. "Time to leave stuff in our rooms before we start enjoying this. We'll stay upstairs, and you kids will be down here. I believe you guys remembered the way to the room," Elliot commented, as his information was nothing much for them. It wasn't, but for me, it felt like thunder lighting above my head. I glanced at James, and he glanced back at me, as if we had shared the same thought. We walked into the room, and when I opened the door, I cursed lowly, but not low enough to be dismissed by my brother, who was just behind me. He stuck his head in the room and saw exactly what I was seeing. One damn single bed. "Oh, they must have changed it during the time we haven't come," Thomaz said. Elliot joined him like two worried, curious fathers inside. "Well, that shouldn't be a big deal," he mumbled. "The two used to sleep together all the time. It'll be just like old times." Then he left me alone in the room with him. Alone, with James, and one bed, to sleep together. "Sure, old times," I grumbled. I left my backpack on the mattress, and James came in, completely silent. When our brothers left, he finally talked. "You okay with this?" "Is there another option?" I hit back, even though I knew I could sleep on the couch. But if Thomaz found out, I'd listen to so much whining that it just wasn't worth it. James left his stuff on the couch next to the window and turned to me. "So, aerospace engineering. Sounds like you've been busy," he said, blunt. "Yeah," I answered in the same way, but as always, he wouldn't let it pass. 6 years preparing for it, huh?" It was almost tangible, the touch of anger and venom in his words. I sighed, trying not to succumb to the bad feelings I've grown of him with our silent fight. "And you?" "Graphic design, just like Big Bro." "So, we'll pretend like nothing happened?" he said while giving me a stupid smile. "Why not? You've been doing that just fine since you left without telling me." Before he could say anything, I left the room, catching my brother who was just leaving to get some groceries. I didn't even think twice about jumping in the car. About an hour later. "It's still early afternoon. How about a game of volleyball?" Thomaz suggested, his voice light. "Sure," I replied, doing my best to hide the hesitation in my voice. "Great. Elliot's been dying to get out there. Look at him, he's practically bouncing around like a teenager," Thomaz chuckled. "Hey, remember our last match? You cried like a baby." I rolled my eyes, playing along. "I was 11! You were 14, he said with a grin. I shook my head, smiling despite myself. "Yeah, no, I refuse to accept that." For the first time in a while, I actually felt myself relax. Maybe this wouldn't be so hard after all. I started unpacking some bags and dropped them on the table, trying to stay in the moment. That's when I glanced up and caught sight of Elliot slathered in sunscreen, looking like he just discovered it for the first time. He really was acting like a teenager. I couldn't help but laugh, and for a second, things felt lighter. "Oh my god," I heard James mutter, his sudden voice catching me off guard. I hadn't even noticed him standing nearby. "Let's play a game," Elliot called out, using some ridiculous voice. Thomaz laughed, and I returned to my room to change clothes and grab the ball we had brought along. Once we arrived at the beach, the sun hit just right, warm enough to make my skin tingle, and for a moment I let myself relax. I felt like a rare break from everything I'd been buried under lately. Studying, working, chasing my goals, I hadn't even realized how much I'd stopped living, especially after James left. His sudden absence had left a gap I hadn't bothered to fill. The sound of waves rolling in, seagulls calling, and my brother and Elliot laughing should have set a perfect vibe, but this invisible weight was hanging between us. James and I exchanged quick glances throughout the day like we were tiptoeing around something we couldn't bring ourselves to address. At some point, we sat down for popsicles, and what started as casual small talk shifted. "You two used to be inseparable," Elliot said, smiling like it was no big deal. "Feels weird sometimes remembering how long it's been." I forced a tight smile, trying to play it off. "Yeah, time flies." I glanced over at James, who was shifting uncomfortably, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "It wasn't exactly intentional," he muttered, staring at the waves like they had the answers. "What do you mean?" Thomaz asked, oblivious to the undercurrent. James shrugged. "Long story. Anyway, let's hit the volleyball court. I'm ready to crush you oldies." I jumped at the chance to change the subject, grabbing the ball. "Let's see about that." The tension simmered beneath the surface, my jaw clenched tight, but I played it off, keeping things light. I was pretty good at ignoring stuff, at least on the outside. Still, it was impossible not to think about the past, our late-night talks, gaming marathons, and dumb arguments as kids. "Old versus pricks, then," Thomaz joked, but for some reason, it irritated me. I wasn't even sure why I expected to be on his team. At least the game itself was a distraction. It worked right up until I accidentally bumped into James. That brief contact sent a jolt through me. "Sorry," I mumbled quickly, stepping back. "It's fine," he said, grabbing the ball. His voice had an edge to it. "Is it, though? Are we really fine?" I asked him. "What do you want me to say, Markus?" he said, frustration creeping in. "I'm here. You're here. That's all there is." Before I could respond, Thomaz called out, "Hey, it's just a game. Relax." I forced a laugh, pretending like everything was normal, and managed to play through the rest of the match without losing it. Once it was over, I felt so exhausted that all I wanted was my bed, until I remembered I have to share it with him. Luckily, the others got tired pretty fast. We liked to joke about them being old, and they headed out to meet some friends in town, so it was just James and I left alone for dinner. We could either raid the fridge or order a pizza, but the thought of sitting across from him pretending things were normal, I wasn't sure how I'd get through it. Most of the time I just stood there, watching them get ready and leave through the door while James grabbed the goddamn pizza and put it in front of me. I felt like I was zoned out for some good minutes, and the sound of him chewing finally woke me. I started eating, trying to be normal, but as more time passed, I looked at his face, his familiar face, the way he always sat hunched over while eating, the more the memories flooded in. They mixed with everything I hadn't said, hadn't felt, anger, doubt, the weight of time and distance pressing in all at once. Before I could stop myself, it slipped out. "You left and didn't tell me." James froze mid-bite. He set his slice down, his face shifting into something darker, something I hadn't seen in a long time. "I tried, Markus," he said, his voice tight. "I called you, over and over." I put my slice down, too, my frustration bubbling up. "Not enough. You didn't tell me in person. You didn't say anything, James." My voice was steady, but I could feel everything rising to the surface. He ran a hand through his hair, his frustration spilling over, and it felt like a mirror. "I tried," he shouted in outrage, frustration seeping into his voice. "How many times did I call, and you didn't answer? You've got to be kidding me. You were traveling. Elliot had to move in a hurry, and I'm in the wrong?" I felt a surge of anger, but more than that, relief. Finally, we were getting this out. "You were my best friend," I shot back, "and you just vanished." "It all happened so fast. Elliot got the job, and we had to move. There wasn't time, okay?" His words were quieter now, but they cut just the same. I thought you didn't care anymore." I opened my mouth ready to argue, but his words hit a little too close to home. He was right. I hadn't answered his calls. I hadn't tried. I was too angry, too confused, too caught up in the mess of everything, and also the last kiss. But instead of saying any of that, I just nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. He stood up as if he was going to leave the kitchen, and I felt the urge to say something. Things couldn't stay like that. Not when we finally had the time and place to talk about it. I needed to be less of a coward. "I cared, more than you realize." He looked at me as if I were a stranger, which hurt more than his words or what happened. "I never meant to hurt you. I thought you hated me. After that kiss." "What? What?" My mouth repeated my thoughts. "Damn, James, we were 16. Of course that would be weird and different from all we knew, but never enough for me to hate you. How could I?" His eyes glanced at me, his expression becoming less shocked and hurtful. He was genuinely surprised. That should be my fault. I've always been too closed off, but I expected him to know me better. "I was so scared after what I did," he confessed. "So confused." "Me too, James, but you didn't even give us the chance to figure it out." He sighed, pissed. "Don't blame it all on me. If you had answered my calls, you'd know. You would know if you didn't miss our trips or gatherings. You avoided me all this time like I was nothing," he said, his anger clearly visible in his voice. Now he stumbled towards the living room. opening the balcony door, presenting us with the sea breeze, and it was so pleasant that I wished the wind could take my pain away too. I sat on the couch, looking from him to the sky. He was right. I should have tried harder. He moved to another city, but it wasn't that far. Not enough for us to stop being friends, or something else. Our brothers surely didn't stop dating, even though it was rough for them. Elliot returned to town last year, and I was so focused on my studies that I'd grown used to avoiding James. It kept going like normal, but again, we were 16. I gave a sarcastic laugh. We were just stupid teenagers. He smiled. Agreed. Silence fell over us, but it didn't feel so heavy this time. He went outside, and I decided to follow him. The night was filled with stars, and I was filled with good emotions about my childhood memories and my moments with James. He was quiet all the way down the stairs, connecting our house to the beach, and when my feet touched the sand, I felt the urge to kill the weirdness that remained. Remember when we used to race down this beach? I asked. You'd always let me win, he said, smiling softly, as he seemed to recall. That's because you whined when you lost, I smirked. He grinned. I still do. Want to bet? Competitive as always, huh? Some things really don't change, he said. The air between us started to feel more at ease, and I wanted him to feel that too. Except now, I won't let you win. We stood there for a blink of an eye, and suddenly I took off running towards the water, sand kicking up behind me. Hey, that's unfair, James shouted, and his laughter followed me close, indicating he was right behind me already. I felt a rush of exhilaration, the wind whipping through my hair, the ocean growing louder with every step. I glanced over my shoulder to see James grinning, his competitive streak shining through as he pushed himself to match my pace. At the last second, I slowed just enough to let him pass me, his feet hitting the water first with a triumphant shout. Still too slow, he teased, splashing water at me. I wiped my face, shaking my head in mock defeat. Lucky win, I muttered, though I couldn't stop smiling. We stood there breathless, with the sea lapping at our feet. The sun was setting behind us, casting a golden light that made everything feel softer and warmer. For a moment, it was just the two of us, standing side by side, the world quiet except for the rhythmic crash of the waves. I missed this, James said suddenly, his voice softer now. I missed us, I replied. The surprise about that simple secret exchange was all over his face. His eyes locked on me, my heart skipped a beat, just like it used to do when we were old enough to understand romance, and that's the whole point of all that between us. My heart thudded in my chest. The friendship turned into romance. Something outside of what we knew. The breaking point was already an undeniable truth, and all I could do was ask. I took a step closer, my voice dropping almost a whisper. What can we do from now on? His smile faltered, replaced by an intensity that sent a pulse of heat between us. His eyes flicked to my lips for just a second, then back to mine. His voice came out low, steady. That's up to you. I let the silence between us linger for a moment, feeling the weight of all the things we hadn't said. The challenge of who we were, what we'd become, was still there, and I couldn't resist pushing it further. I smiled provocatively and whispered, Do you think you can beat me now? James chuckled, but he was also fire, which meant he wouldn't let me win that easily. His fingers brushed against my arm, barely touching, sending chills through me. He gave a soft but evil smile. I think I might have a chance this time, he said, his voice low. The space between us became even thinner, our bodies touching without question. I felt my breath catch in my throat, and for a moment everything else faded away. The beach, the waves, the past. I really have missed us, and what we could have been, even if we haven't spoken about that yet, or even if we'd never do. I just wanted the present, that moment, his touch, the way he made me go back to a time when things were simpler. But now we were adults. A kiss wouldn't cause such damage or make things so uncertain. I leaned in, embracing his waist with one hand. I enjoyed the warmth of his breath near my face, his eyes closed, and I could feel my pulse racing. My mind was torn between closing the distance and pulling back, which I wouldn't. That was for sure. James, I called, pulling him out of his daze. Can I finally kiss you again? Thought you'd never ask. His smile brightened the night, and I threw my body over him, doing whatever I wanted, and that included kissing him in many places, unstopped. From the beach to the shower, then to the bed we found ourselves having to share. Some hours later. Markus! The urgency in James' voice yanked me from my sleep, leaving the sheets tangled around me like a forgotten comfort. He was already dressed, standing at the edge of the bed, his expression carved with something close to dread. I blinked once, twice, until the haze of sleep cleared, and the shift in the air settled in my chest. Something was wrong. Come with me, he said, his words holding more weight than they should. What's going on? I asked, feeling the tightness coil in my stomach. "Just come." His hand found mine, pulling me out of the bed, through the door, and out onto the balcony. The night still clung to the edges of dawn, the sand beneath us cool and soft as we descended the stairs. I followed him in silence, the gentle hum of the ocean growing louder with each step. When my toes finally touched the water, its chill was a shock, but not enough to distract from the gnawing feeling growing inside me. I could feel it. This wasn't just about today. This was about everything that had been left unsaid between us, all the unhealed wounds still lingering under the surface. We stopped at the shoreline, our hands still locked together, but his grip was loose, almost hesitant. The salt air filled my lungs, but instead of calming me, it stoked the anxiety that had been simmering since the moment I woke up. "Elliot needs to go back to the city earlier than expected, and I have to go with him," James said, intertwining his fingers with mine. "I didn't want you to wake up and find me gone." I let out a sarcastic laugh, a defense mechanism kicking in. "Thanks for your kindness." "Markus, don't start with that attitude now, not when I'm trying so hard not to repeat my mistakes." His irritation was justified, and I felt the sting of the truth in his words. I looked past him, taking in the clear sky, the seagulls soaring above, and the trees swaying with the gentle breeze. But my focus returned to James. His tousled hair, those intense eyes, everything about him was captivating, more beautiful than the view behind him. At that moment, I realized he was truly trying. I didn't need to fortify my defenses. He deserved my honesty. "My bad," I said softly, settling into the sand as the waves lapped at my fingers. James joined me, and we shared the peaceful silence as the sun slowly crested the horizon. "You could stay," I offered, the words coming out softer than I intended. "Leave with me and Thomaz later." "I asked that already," he grunted in frustration. "But Elliot said he must prepare for the new semester. He's teaching earlier than expected." His heavy sigh deepened the ache in my heart. I didn't want to lose him again, not when we were so close. We were back in the same city, rebuilding what we had, but it felt precarious. It was time for me to act. A relationship takes two people willing to navigate the uncertainty together. Without giving it a second thought, I tugged his hand, pulling him toward the water. He followed, surprise flickering across his face, but he didn't resist. We jumped into the icy water together, the shock of the cold igniting a rush of adrenaline. James's laughter echoed around us as I wrapped my arms around his waist, pulling him under. When we resurfaced, the salt water splashed around us, and I leaned in, kissing him deeply. "I've been thinking," I began, my tone now deadly serious. "Long distance doesn't have to be the end. We'll figure it out. We've made it this far." James nods, trying to suppress the familiar ache in his chest. "Yeah, we'll make it work. Weekends, calls, whatever it takes." He stayed silent for a couple of seconds, and I was scared he'd back out. But then he said, "I was thinking about moving campus. What do you think?" The surprise settled in, and I felt my heart lighten, the tension in my body releasing all at once. "You're serious?" "As serious as I've ever been," James said, his hand finding me again, our fingers wrapping up as one. "I want to be close. I don't want to miss out on us because of a busy schedule and a few miles. You mean too much to me. Always did." I grinned wide, completely melted inside out. "You really know how to keep me on edge, don't you?" James laughs, pulling me into a tight embrace. "So what do you say? We'll still have to figure out the logistics and paperwork, but we'll be together, for real." "I say let's do it. We can make this work. Dorms, my place, your place, I don't care, as long as we're together." James' smile widened, and his eyes crinkled at the corners. "Did you really enjoy sharing a room with me that much?" I smirked. "I like sharing a bed." He gave me a little slap on the shoulder and laughed out loud. "Not a lie, though, but I mean it. We'll make it work." "Do you promise?" he asked, vulnerability creeping into his voice. "I do," I replied, my heart resolute. James leaned into me, the doubt fading from his eyes. The waves continued to roll around us, but at that moment, I felt a profound sense of clarity. We didn't need to have all the answers right now. We had each other, and that was enough. As we stood there, surrounded by the whispers of the ocean, I knew we could face whatever came next together. Everything was falling into place, with or without the plans. We had already made the most important choice, to be in each other's lives, no matter what. Conclusion. Soon enough, within a few months, all the paperwork of changing the campus was done, and me and James were now sharing a dorm at my university. It was better than anything I could have ever asked for. We spent all the time we got making up for the years lost, the past finally forgotten, and our love emerging stronger than it was before. The end. Have you ever experienced an old flame rekindling? Thanks for watching. Consider subscribing to become part of our Rainbow Force, and stay wholesome.